I was brainwashed to say the least. And I even looked at going into the military as a firefighter. Like several firefighters in my department in Seattle actually went back into the military or joined again. So I literally wanted to go fight. It was that angry. So I got hooked.
This was Erik Lawyer, the founder of Firefighters for 9/11 Truth. What struck me most in this interview was his frank admission that at first he actually defended the mainstream narrative about what happened on this tragic day, but later, after his own investigation, changed his outlook on what really took place. This interview has been taken a little while back, but has lost nothing of its urgent message. It fits perfectly with my recent discussion with Dr. Piers Robinson and the Swiss historian Dr. Daniele Ganser, who said, and I quote, "I want to explain that there are strategic thinkers who say I'll sacrifice 1,000 or 2,000 people of my own to make everybody so angry that after that I can really go to war." Now, before you jump to hasty conclusions, let me ask you this. If American officials could publicly defend policies that led to the death of 500,000 Iraqi children and frame that staggering toll as worth it, if those same circles are today active participants in what much of the world now calls a genocide in Gaza, then what exactly is the outer limit of what they are willing to justify in the name of national security? Because that's the real question. Not whether you believe any particular theory or whether the historical records show a pattern of strategic cruelty, manufactured consent, and covert operations carried out far from public scrutiny. Look at the CIA's role in China, Iran, Guatemala. Look at the fabricated evidence used to sell the Iraq war. Look at Operation Northwood, a declassified proposal by the US military to stage attacks on American soil and blame them on Cuba. These aren't fringe myths. They are documented episodes showing how state power can cross moral boundaries the public would never imagine. So, when people raise uncomfortable questions about 9/11, about intelligence warnings ignored, drills overlapping with the actual attacks, or the rush to reshape the Middle East immediately afterwards, the point isn't to declare a verdict. The point is to recognize that trust doesn't vanish in a vacuum. It erodes because past actions created a precedent. A government that has repeatedly treated civilian life as expendable abroad should not be shocked when its own population begins to wonder what lines it might be willing to cross at home. And here we go. Erik Lawyer, thank you so much for your time today. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you, Thomas?
Thank you. Very well. Greetings from Amsterdam. Where are you actually? Where are you?
I'm in Boulder, Colorado.
Okay, good. Um, Erik, I came across your name when I did my research for Richard. I interviewed Richard Gale, the founder from Engineers and Architects for 9/11 Truth. And I found a number of organizations in addition to architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, right? There are lawyers for 9/11 Truth. There are, of course, firefighters, where we come in a moment to. There are the Families United, right? So I think behind the victims of this tragic day, the firefighters are probably the second most affected group in this tragic story. You're the founder of Firefighters for 9/11 Truth, but there are some other organizations who also are seeking the truth in that matter. So we already mentioned architects and engineers, Richard Gale. Yeah, I did my research for his interview, and this is how I came on Firefighters for 9/11. And you are the founding father of that organization. Can you tell us a little bit how you progress from a firefighter who kind of rejected any criticism on the official narrative to your beliefs today?
Yeah, thank you, Thomas. Yeah, I was on a federal team with the Seattle Fire Department that we thought would be called up for 9/11. It turns out we had two different teams and our other team was called up. So a lot of us paid our own way out there to go out to New York and support how we could. So I saw in the weeks following, I saw firsthand the devastation and attended funerals and we'd stand honor guard when they found pieces of firefighters' bodies. So it was a very emotional experience, to say the least. And I was really angry. I wanted to destroy the Middle East. And anybody who would question the official story, I'd get angry with. I even told my own lieutenant that he should leave the country if he really believed that was possible, that somehow we were involved. And so people just learned not to say anything around me. And then fast forward, it was in 2007. I had one of my best friends at the time was a vice president of a major bank in Seattle, and he had said, he came over one night and I could tell he was upset. And I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "If I didn't know better, I would swear there are people trying to destroy our economy." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "I'm being ordered to do things for the bank that an Econ 101 student wouldn't do, and it's going to destroy the bank." And that bank did fail during the banking collapse. So that night, I was like, "What the heck?" And my friend, he was a West Point graduate and military guy. I was like, "No way!" Like he's not a conspiracy theorist at all. So I started doing my own research, and when I did, a lot of the documentaries on who controls the money supply and that type of thing pointed to 9/11 also. So because it wasn't being shoved down my throat, I was willing to look. And when I started looking, I was like, "What is the evidence? What kind of investigation did they do?" The more I saw, the more shocked I was. And I came across one of Richard Gage's videos, and I watched it and was like, just blown away. Like this was so grounded. And I knew these things. Like I saw them that day when it happened, but it's like somehow I lied to myself. And so 2 days later, I think it was, or 3 days later, he had a talk scheduled already in Vancouver, Canada. So just a few hours from Seattle. So I drove up for that. And once I saw that, I was like, there's just no way. I couldn't deny it at that point. And so I'm driving home. I became super paranoid. I'm like, everyone's watching me. My whole world was collapsing. And as I'm driving down the freeway, I literally was having an anxiety attack and I had to pull over. And I don't have anxiety attacks. So this was shocking me. And as I pulled over, I realized I have to do something. And so it was like this force inside of me that just was like, no. And so I like planted a flag metaphorically in the side of the ground on the side of the freeway. And I was like, not on my watch. And so I knew in that moment I'm founding Firefighters for 9/11 Truth. And as soon as I made that decision, it was like I could breathe again. And what was amazing was all the different people that reached out to me. So it just unfolded really quickly. And because I was a firefighter, I had a lot of military intelligence, a military colonel, retired colonel, reach out to me because they wanted to protect me and help me understand what was happening. And as they said, the world trusts firefighters. So we need this group to really, start waking people up. And because of those connections, I learned a lot really quickly. And as one of them had said, "You've opened a door in the world you know nothing about. And if you're not careful," and I finished his sentence, I said, "Get myself killed." He goes, "Oh no, much worse." And I was like, "You got my attention." So they helped me see how to navigate this whole, what's going on. And then that was 2007, 2008. And then in 2011, basically, I got really sucked into the corruption and conspiracies and got lost in the abyss. I think as Nietzsche says that, like, you stare too long into the abyss will stare back into you. And that's exactly what was happening. And luckily I had a man reached out. It was another different story, but I ended up having a spiritual awakening that was super radical, I guess you could say, non-deniable. And once that happened, that changed my direction completely. And so in the last few years, to me, the greatest dishonor to the 343 and all the people killed in the wars is to pretend like we're not being lied to. So that's a dishonor in a big way. To me, the greatest honor is not trials and all that stuff. It's changing myself and working with others to change our society, to change our world so that 9/11s never happen again. Like that's the deepest honoring. Don't let them die in vain. Like let's change ourselves. Let's change this planet. Let's change humanity. And that's where I'm at today.
Yeah, you said a couple of interesting things. First of all, you said you were angry at the Middle East. Can you be more specific? Which country?
Yeah, whatever ones the news media was telling me was responsible
Okay.
for 9/11. So, at the time Iraq, but even though it made no sense, so was Afghanistan, Iraq, just the Middle East in general, because I was brainwashed to say the least. And I even looked at going into the military as a firefighter, like several firefighters in my department in Seattle actually went back into the military or joined again. So I literally wanted to go fight. It was that angry. So I got hooked.
Yeah, I'm asking because I'm literally having on my screen an image from a helmet from a soldier who was in Iraq with the Pentagon and the Twin Towers on it, right? And I read studies that
Yep.
75%, more than 75% of the soldiers who went to Iraq believed that Saddam Hussein was responsible for 9/11, whilst anyone with a basic understanding of the Middle East would have known that Saddam Hussein is a natural or was a natural arch enemy of Al Qaeda, right? But talking about brainwashing, this is already where it starts.
Yeah.
And then you said military intelligence. So are you saying that there is a group within the military intelligence that contests, I mean, like engineers and architects for 9/11, or like your group that you founded? Is there such an equivalent in the military? Is that what you're saying in the military intelligence?
It's Yeah, it's not an organized group. It's insiders and a lot of retired. It's like fire department. If you speak out while you're active, you're done. So most of them are retired. And I don't know if you can still go to it, but you could find it on the Wayback Machine. Do you know about that? The Wayback Machine?
Yep. Yep.
Um, you do? Okay. So if you go to Patriots Question 9/11, there's a whole list of a lot of military and intelligence officers and stuff on there that have come out. So I had the colonel that reached out to me was Lieutenant Colonel George Nelson. He's no longer alive, but he was the Air Force crash investigator for the military. He was the one in charge of that division, and I interviewed him myself and talked to him many times. And he's the one who started connecting me with a kind of an underground group that he trusted, and so that's really where I learned the most of what was happening. And since then, I've met someone that was directly involved, actually invited to participate in 9/11, and that person's helped fill in the blanks that I couldn't, that no 9/11 research I knew had ever discovered, and that was a game changer for me. So there are quite a few people that are waiting for the right time to bring a lot more information out about what happened.
You just said participated in 9/11. Can you be a bit more specific? What exactly do you mean? Participated how?
He was invited. How would I say it? I got to be careful what I say. He's okay
I
with me
understand.
sharing this, and there will be a time when I share more, and he will too. How would I say this? So 9/11, like when I wanted revenge, would be the best way to say it. I wanted revenge against the Middle East to destroy the terrorists that I was told about. Then I wanted revenge against this shadow government that had lied to us, and the whole thing. Like I saw them as the enemy. So when I was blaming others, I wanted to destroy. It wasn't until the spiritual awakening and my mentor at the time helped me see this guy's responsible for 9/11 also, and and the more I let that in and could see how I was participating, what ended up happening was then it's like whether it's what I don't know your beliefs, but I believe it's when your consciousness is ready, you can start seeing things and meeting people at a different level and understanding at a different level. So when I had that, I was introduced to a man that had direct connections to CIA. He didn't work for them, but he would work with them, and he how would I say this? He lots of history doing operations and stuff. His specialty was getting information that nobody else could get on bank records and all kinds of things. Even the NSA couldn't get. So he was in. So 9/11. There's not a lot out on this, but 9/11 was a coup. So it was a coup of the existing shadow government, and this information came to me from multiple sources that didn't know each other. A lot of insiders. So the existing shadow government at the time had been in place since the Battle of Waterloo, and 9/11 and a new faction inside that had proposed at PNAC. They proposed it. We need a new Pearl Harbor type event. So this was a younger faction inside the existing shadow government that wanted to how would I say it, that wanted to accelerate the move towards a one world government. And the old guard was saying, no, we're going to take this at a different pace. So they actually literally factioned off, and it was a coup. So 9/11 was an actual coup. And if you look at the anthrax, I would never understood the anthrax. And this man helped me see it. He goes, it's simple. He goes, it was the coup d'etat. So what they proved in that moment was that they had infiltrated the highest levels of government. So say you have a deep state or shadow government that's controlling, militaries and countries, and now you've got a faction that was able to infiltrate and get in and get that anthrax, which was the most protected, bioweapon on the planet, and they were able to get that thing out, and then they sent it to the people that were the loyalists for the existing shadow government. So in that one fell swoop, they showed we can penetrate and we can send it to you publicly, and we will take you out, stand down. And so that's what they did. And from there, it was a 5-phase plan, and that was phase 2.
So we need to be mindful not to mix too many topics together. Yeah? But I would like to mention one thing.
Yeah, you might want to take that out.
To my knowledge, it was confirmed by multiple universities and scientists that the anthrax actually originated from a US lab, right? That's my understanding.
Right, right.
Yeah. Okay, but let's leave the
But
anthrax.
you might
The
want to take
anthrax.
that out. What's that?
We hereby leave the anthrax topic and focus back on 9/11, right? So when we look at the observable facts, yeah. So one thing that really stood out for me is the apparent measurable free fall of all 3 buildings that collapsed at that day. And we can talk about World Trade Center 7 in a moment. I would also like to mention that never in history buildings as skyscrapers came down due to fire. There are a lot of pro and con arguments from the different interest groups, right? Was the fire hot enough? Was it sufficient? Etc. etc. What we do know is that for World Trade Center 7, I think, which is the linchpin for 9/11, because it was not hit by a plane. And interestingly, when I talk about this topic with people, hardly ever anyone knows World Trade Center 7, the third building, collapsed that day. And curiously, it was announced by BBC to have been collapsed 20 minutes before it actually did. I mean, that's quite amazing. So from your perspective, and from what I would like to understand from you specifically, is how does the firefighter community as a whole view this whole scenario? Where are their sentiments? Where are their thoughts?
Okay, there's so the firefighter community in general is vastly still believing or accepting the official story. So it's the chiefs of the departments and everything else. There's not much dissent inside. Now there's a lot of firefighters that stay quiet and like would privately come to me and say, hey, we're with you. And it's a culture where our lives depend on each other. And so if you rock the boat, or it's like a pack mentality almost. So that's where that's at. Most firefighters don't even know about Tower 7. We're actually going to Vegas for a National Fire Protection Association conference in just a few days. And we did it last year in Boston. And it was the overwhelming majority of the fire professionals that visited our booth, and it was hundreds of them, didn't know about Tower 7. And we just focus on Tower 7 with that organization. We're looking for change in the national standards. So the firefighter community, for the most part, is the same thing as the general public. They don't know about Tower 7, and they kind of leave 9/11 alone because what has been told to me before, it's dishonoring the brotherhood if you bring it back up, if you question the sacrifice they made.
That's interesting because I have edited in some interviews from firefighters from that day in my interview with Richard Gage, and they clearly are saying there were secondary explosions after the airplanes hit, and they just escaped. And they in detail, they described multiple explosions, and they were in the building as the building collapsed on them.
Yeah, it's that's true. And there's over 200 first responder
Yeah.
witnesses. I have the transcripts, I have the audio recordings myself of a lot of the FDNY transmissions. It was over and over and over. And so there's a term, and this is in firefighting. the memory hole, you've probably heard of that term before. Like there's like a collective memory that comes out of something. So because they were saying it that day, it that's what was that's the most accurate to listen to, because they were their firsthand experiences of explosions. And now what ended up happening was they changed the narrative. And when they changed the narrative, you start changing the collective memory. And people that would question it would be shut down. So I talked to a lot of the FDNY guys that knew, hey, there were explosions, and they just told me it's not acceptable in the station to talk about it, so they just start shutting up. And we had even at Seattle Fire and Sacramento, I worked for Sacramento first, then Seattle, we would do post-fire analysis, and we would do it relatively quickly after a fire. And the reason why was to prevent that collective memory from getting foggy. So it was like, because a lot of us would start changing our stories and we had different perspectives. And so we'd really try to get to what really happened. And it was amazing how we all had different experiences. So if you have a narrative in the country, the media keeps repeating it, and it's not acceptable to talk about it in the firehouse, it's really easy to steer that. And then you just kind of accept it, like I did too, because I heard those the first day. And in 1993, there were terrorists used explosions on that building. And where we went as firefighters for 9/11 Truth was into the national standards. There's national standards for a fire investigation. And one of the national standards is to test for explosives, given all that damage that was there. That NIST refuses to this day to do that. So they're violating the national standards. And that's where it's like, to me, if you're unwilling to look at the potential, a possibility of an explosion, it's a cover up.
I think the NIST report is widely criticized, right, for quite a number of reasons. First of all, I think initially they didn't even mention World Trade Center 7. Yeah, that was later then done. I have it in front of me. A report claims that fire was the cause. So in 2008, yeah, after 7 years, NIST then said it was a fire after they were pressured actually to revisit World Trade Center 7, right? So, and if
Yeah.
I'm not mistaken, and please feel free to correct me, so the World Trade Center 7 had 81 columns, and one of those columns is has to be weakened by the fire, and as a result of which the whole building collapsed in a symmetric fashion in free fall
Yeah.
in its own footprint, based on a couple of
Right.
local fires. Yeah. So if you talk about this with
Right.
your firefighter colleagues, I mean, they're experienced, especially World Trade Center 7. I mean, how
Yeah. I can say from my own experience, and then I'll say what I've experienced with others, is I saw that thing come down, and people that questioned the official story before I were showing me that. And I'm like, and I literally would research online to find the excuses of how that could happen, because my brain is going, that shouldn't be happening. That shouldn't be happening. Because every building collapse I had seen as a firefighter, and I had watched demolitions and everything. I saw the Kingdom come down, high rises in Seattle. I've seen them come down, and I'm like, that's a classic demolition. But my brain wouldn't let me believe that. So I literally did everything I could not to believe it. And that's what I experienced with firefighters. And so when I don't do this anymore because it's not effective. But when I would argue, you could say, "Hey, what about this, this, this?" And it's almost when the person gets painted in a corner and there's no way out, then it just turns to anger and just shut up kind of thing. And so I literally had even fire investigators tell me, because I'd say, "What's the excuse for not testing?" Like in a routine house fire, if we suspected even the slightest use of an accelerant, and explosives are called exotic accelerants, if we suspected even the slightest use, we're going to test. So the first time ever in history that 3 high rises collapsed symmetrically from, ever, why are we not testing? There's no excuse. And so when I asked them that, and I said, why did NIST refuse? And they're like, oh, I don't, they'd either get really angry and tell me to shut up, or they'd say, I don't know, we think this literally is what a lot of them would say. The mafia might be involved, and they're selling the steel, and they don't want to be caught for, all the money that's being made on the back end right now. But they'd still want to believe the terrorists are the ones who did this. And to me, it's the cognitive dissonance, and it's sad. And I've been part of it. So I get it.
So meanwhile, and as recently as 2019, we have the Halsey report from the University of Alaska, and they unambiguously confirmed that World Trade Center 7 cannot have been collapsed by fire, right? They spent, I think, 4 years, right? That's academic research. They are not looking for conspiracy confirmations. So whatever it wasn't the fire. And then coming back to the explosions, there were two elements to that because you said testing for explosions. But there were explosions. And again, in my interview with Richard Gale, I have a clip where you can hear the explosions from World Trade Center 7 in the clip. And you also see the firefighters reacting to those explosions. But there was another element,
Yeah.
termite. People confuse explosions with termite. Termite are in addition to explosions. Termite doesn't explode. It creates just an extremely high temperature and does so very, very quickly. Explaining those lava streams, also in my interview with Richard Gales, what firefighters talk about, lava streams like in a foundry. Is that something you have heard?
Yeah, I've seen all those videos you're talking about, and we have them on the Firefighters for 9/11 Truth website also. So that's what I spent a lot of time when I first started looking into this because I wanted to see my own evidence. And so I started researching and found a lot of those videos. Um, and what's interesting when you say thermite, I've got the national standards right here. And it's interesting because thermite is specifically, uh, hold on one second, I'll find it. Yeah, here it is specifically mentioned. So this is the national standards for fire investigation, and it's called exotic accelerants. It's basically thermite mixtures also produce exceedingly hot fires, and they generally leave residues that may be visually or chemically identifiable, and that these should be tested for. The national standards also get into definition of an explosion. So one of NIST's excuses that why they didn't test for it, this is insane. It's like going, okay, no, 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 no. We're going to make excuses why we don't test. In fire investigations, just as in police investigations, you investigate everything that's a potential. You don't go, no, 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 we're not testing, we're not testing. But one of their main excuses is that there weren't the loud enough sounds. They didn't have the decibels didn't go high enough. Well, NFPA 921.23.1.4 says definition of an explosion, and this is the quote from the manual. Although an explosion is almost always accompanied by the production of a loud noise, the noise itself is not an essential element of an explosion. So the generation and violent escape of gases are the criteria. So when you see the boof, and all the things happening, like the national standards, if you just go one by one, there's so many that show that they should have tested for these explosions. And they even talk about you never have found the cause until you find the one cause that can match all the levels of damage for that building. So none of those, the lava and all those fires don't account for that. So you have to go into the exotic accelerants in those. So to me, with Tower 7, they had no physical evidence. When they did that investigation 7 years later, they'd already destroyed it. That's a federal crime. That's a federal evidence crime. So nobody's been held accountable. If we were to do that in a local fire department, people would be arrested and there'd be lawsuits on it. Yet on the greatest, property damage in US history or failure, it was all destroyed for Tower 7. To me, it's insanity, but it's undeniable. So the only way to deny it is if you're in that cognitive dissonance.
You're right. They destroyed evidence very quickly, but the termite is still available in those. I read there are thousands of dust samples still available today, and some of them have been tested, and you can indeed find nanoparticles of termite in them. So there is no question. If my information, my research is correct, then there is no question that termite nanoparticles are in the dust samples that are circulating around the world.
Yeah, no, and that includes all three towers. That's the dust is spread all
Yeah.
over, so that includes them all. When I say no evidence, to be more accurate, they destroyed the majority. But to be more accurate is they use no physical evidence in their investigation, and they admit that in their frequently asked questions. So to me, it's the first time I've ever heard of a fire investigation that had no physical evidence. It's ludicrous. So that alone is like, why are you not using physical evidence to understand why the first building ever collapsed from fire ever? Type 1 construction, it's called.
Yeah. And I should have probably asked this at the very beginning. Erik, how long are you a firefighter?
Mm-hmm.
How many years are you a firefighter?
25 years.
25 years.
25 years I was.
Okay. That means you know what you're talking about. This is what I want to underline here.
Yeah, yeah, 25 years in emergency services. I was a firefighter and paramedic, and I was what would I say? I mean, over the 25 years in Sacramento and Seattle, I'd seen my share, my fair share of fires and been in high-rise fires, small ones, nothing like 9/11. But I also did a ton of research with fire investigators in that once I founded Firefighters for Unlimited Truth. So that's where I learned the most about the fire investigation and, what should have been done and how ludicrous this really is. And that's why fire investigators, they can't explain it. Why, the one that I spent the most time with, he said, if we had done that here, I'd be in prison, at a local level.
If we return to World Trade Center 7, because if I understood you correctly at the beginning, you said your group focuses on World Trade Center 7. Is that correct?
So I've two different organizations I work with. Firefighters for 9/11 Truth is more an awareness type organization, and a
Okay.
new one is called PAPA, which is Protecting All Protectors Alliance, and that we're looking at changing the national. We're looking. Our intention is for the NFPA to get really clear because, in that one, we're focusing just on Tower 7, the Solomon Brothers building is what it's called. And the reason why is that's the first ever, the only type 1 fire protected steel high rise that's collapsed due to fire, according to the NIST report. Now, the thing is, all the national standards for high rise firefighting, not all, a vast majority of key elements should have changed had that been true. And this becomes a problem because we put what are called command posts and staging and everything else in high-rise fires still today. So when you look at the Grenfell fire in London, that fire, I've talked to people that were there. There was mass confusion because these firefighters and the fire commanders, the ones making decisions, had the images of the World Trade Center towers coming down. So they thought because that was burning way more intensely than the World Trade Center was, they thought they were going to have a full collapse. So others didn't. Others were saying no, it's not going to collapse. So they were getting mixed orders. Do we evacuate? What do we do? And firefighters themselves were scared to go in because they thought the building would come down around them. So more people died because of this confusion. Will it collapse? So with PAPA, what we're standing for is we need to get real clear. So NFPA is the one who has to make it clear. So you either put a paragraph in there saying we have looked at the NIST report and we disagree with it, or we're not taking those findings. So national standards have not changed because this is not credible, basically, or they changed the national standards. And one of the guys that's part of our organization, he was a fire captain with me in Seattle, and he's actually the one who's written the most recent book on engine company fireground operations, where there's the high rise chapter on that. And he officially was not believing that when I approached him with 9/11 11 years plus years ago, he's like, oh, you no, like just wouldn't let it in. When he was given the honor of writing that textbook for the NFPA as the national standard, he did a ton of research, and then he realized this doesn't make any sense. So he's now on board and saying it's my reputation and my duty, because I can't put out misinformation to firefighters that if this building's really going to collapse, then we can't go into these things. But if it's not, then we have to let them know that this is not accurate. So do you get what I'm saying? Like, it's really important to get clear on this because decisions are being made and lives are being lost because of the misinformation.
So if I understand you correctly, then the fire brigades have a standard operating procedure, which includes to go into the buildings, establish a command center there, and evacuate the building. So, and you are saying, if we now have a situation where there's the high likelihood that high-rise building that spur collapse, you would have to change the standard operating procedures, right? That's what you're saying. And this did not
Yes,
happen,
the
right?
thing,
As a result.
it, the Yeah, the standard operating procedures did not change. Now, the thing is, on evacuating, we call it protect in place or defend in place. To this day, it's most of the time, it's still a lot safer to leave the people in the building and put the fire out. So it wasn't that we would set up command post and staging, and we typically keep the people in the building. I've been on several high-rise fires where we keep the people in the building because it's a lot easier to put that out and not have people walking through fire to escape the building. Does that make sense?
No.
So right now, my point is, we're saying if it can really collapse that quickly, then we need to dump all the buildings, which then changes the entire tactic because firefighters can't get up there as quickly to put the fire out if you've got all the occupants coming down the same stairwells. So it becomes a big mess.
So we know that prior to 9/11, there was not a single high-rise building that ever collapsed due to fire. Now, to your knowledge, since 9/11, has there been a single fire, high-rise fire, where the building has collapsed?
Yeah, and I don't have it memorized. I think it was the Middle East, but there's a lot of, if you look at the pattern, it looks like it was brought down with some demolition also. There, and to be clear, it's not that any high rises never collapse. There have been high rises. It's no type 1 fire protected steel. Concrete and steel high rises ever collapsed due to fire. The ones that have collapsed that are not fire protected, they didn't go straight down through their own footprint. They toppled type thing or crumbled. So there's never been anything like the three on 9/11.
Okay. And again, if you focus back on World Trade Center 7, let me think this through. So on one side, we have an airplane which supposedly has crashed because the passengers fought the terrorists, right? On the other side, we have a building that was not hit by an airplane. Now, what's often misunderstood is, and I'm coming to Rudy Giuliani with this little segue here. What's often misunderstood is that in order to execute a controlled demolition, let's just say World Trade Center 7 or a similar building is brought down by a controlled demolition, this takes at least weeks, if not months, first of all, planning, and then the physical placement of the explosives. This is not something you can decide on the same afternoon, and then an hour or 2 or 3 later, you pull it, right? So,
Right.
and this is where I come to Giuliani, because apparently, and I've seen some of those, he has given multiple interviews on the day where he actually said we had to pull it, and that he had advanced knowledge that all 3 buildings actually came down. And if I'm not mistaken, that's also one of the reasons why the firefighter community does not really hold him in high regard, because apparently he had prior knowledge and did not warn anybody. Is that something you can confirm?
I can confirm. I know Silverstein, Larry Silverstein, the owner of the trade centers, used the term "pull it." I don't know for sure. I do remember. I think Giuliani said that, but Silverstein's the one who was really clear in his interview and when in question about it. I do know the firefighters in New York as a collective do not like Giuliani at all. The big thing back when I was first started 9/11 Truth and I was talking to several of them, the big thing was the radios. So it wasn't just that he had foreknowledge, it was that the radios that they had, the FDNY had, they'd had problems. It's called bonking, that where they weren't getting out from inside the towers, and they knew this well before 9/11. And Giuliani basically would not allow them to get new radios. So what the firefighters are the most upset about, the ones I talked to, was that they could have dumped the building, as we call it, just everyone evacuate the building. They could have gotten a lot more firefighters out once that first tower went down from the second one, but that they didn't receive the radio communications. So there's a documentary even called Rudy and the Radios or something. And that's where the most anger is. But he done several things that I know, pissed off the firefighters collectively. And yeah, the foreknowledge, there's there's a lot of evidence that there was a lot of foreknowledge on Tower 7 specifically, but on both or on all three.
Yeah. Now, if you match 2 events here, the collapse of World Trade Center 7, which by all reasonable logic and experience of firefighters was not supposed to come down. There was no reason to believe this building comes down. And if you overlay this event with the other event that the BBC actually broadcasted the collapse of the World Trade Center 7 20 minutes before it actually happened. So how are the odds of that happening? BBC said, well, we got the information from Reuters. Well, it's irrelevant where the information came from. Somebody knew in advance that World Trade Center 7 came down, right? Or is it just a coincidence?
Right. Well, I'd be speculating, but it's really clear to me because you had so many World Trade Centers, two and five, and several of them that were had way more extensive damage from the falling towers and way more fire than Tower 7 did. And nobody mentioned those coming down, and they didn't. None of those collapsed. They had partial collapses from the falling debris, but none of those did. So I mean, just your listeners can use their own judgment on this, but to have never had a concrete and steel fire protected building ever come down in world history, to be able to isolate the one that has pocket fires and say that's the one that's coming down, to me, it's impossible.
Yeah. And I know from Richard that actually in World Trade Center 7, Rudy Giuliani had built his so-called bunker, right? That was a whole office floor with the bulletproof glass and everything, which was designed to deal with that type of emergency, right? But there were some other interesting, let's say, functions or institutions in that building. Can you name?
Mhm.
Do you know what I'm referring to?
Yes. Yeah, CIA, the Securities and Exchange, there was investigations going on in that building. The Enron investigation files were in that building. So there was a lot. And yeah, that building was reinforced because it was the Emergency Operations Center, Rudy Giuliani's, bunker. And there's a man named Barry Jennings. I don't know if you've heard about him or looked into his stuff. Have you? Barry Jennings was the director for the Emergency Operations Center, and he came in that day. And when he came in, it was already evacuated. And his story it's heart wrenching because he testifies, and I mean, he's not a conspiracy nut. On that day, there's literally interviews with him covered in dust. He was trapped for a long time. The FDNY had to save him, and he was stepping over dead bodies. There were explosions going off. He talks about in Tower 7 while he was in there. There were dead bodies, which to this day they say that nobody was killed in Tower 7. He's like, that's a lie. And he did a long extended interview. And I don't want to say, I'm not putting this out there, but the day before was the day or 2 days before his interview was coming out, he died. And so this was years ago. And to me, he is the most credible witness and the most accurate. He describes so much of what happened, how, and the things and they have video of him and Mr. Hess. Mr. Hess was the legal counsel for Giuliani. So he was with Mr. Hess when this happened. And they've got literal physical videos of them trapped in Tower 7 from the windows yelling down. And, in that day, their story was it's consistent, or Barry's was consistent what that story was the original day too, all the way up until he died. And he said, and if he brought that up to anyone, he was told to not talk about it.
So there was a documentary about this. Did I understand it correctly?
Oh yeah.
Do you know how it's called?
Yeah, just Google Barry Jennings, and I can send you a link to it too.
Okay.
Barry Jennings, and I forget the name of the documentary, but I mean, you can find it, just Barry Jennings 9/11.
Okay. Okay. And at the beginning, you mentioned money. So I would not necessarily discuss money with you as a firefighter. Yeah. But I have a
Mhm.
scientific paper in front of me. It's called Detecting Informed Trading Activities in the Options Market. And they're referring to specifically 9/11. So there was
Mhm.
apparent foreknowledge that can be deducted out of money transfers on prior to 9/11. Yeah. And you said something about money. So what is it that you know about money flows?
Well, my buddy who was, I wanted to, when he came over and said what he'd said, I wanted to know who controls the money supply and all that. From 9/11, once I started researching that, yeah, there were all kinds of shorts. There's money that just disappeared. And I'll say this, I'm not going to name him, but one of my good friends um, the from the fire department was a chief. Now, one of the patterns, if you start looking at false flag operations, one of the patterns is they create a drill the day of, or before. So the jets and all that, they had the military drill going on. Well, what they also had was a fire department, a an incident command system drill going on. So my chief, it wasn't the chief, but one of the battalion chiefs, was sent out to New York before 9/11 happened for this drill. So he was there when it happened, and he ended up becoming one of the commanders in the command center for it, because he's one of the best in the country, and he became one of the part of the incident command system response and the command staff. And when I've talked to him about it, he he would defend it aggressively. And there came a time years later when he softened more, and he finally said it this way. He said, Eric, I know about the money transfers. I know about this. I know about all these different things that happened that day. And it stings to high heaven. And he goes, what I can't do, because I watched so many people die that day and I lost so many of my friends, I cannot let in that conspiracy theory. I can't let it in because it would destroy me. So he said, can we please just not talk about this anymore? And I was like, you got it. And it made me really emotional that day. And he just said, so many of us knew, because of the money transfers and all those other things, they knew it was pre-planned, but they just can't go there. And that's where I feel like it's a lot of, it's others of us that need to go there that weren't as deeply impacted, I'd say, or have the ability to. Because someone like that, it's like, I get it. I mean, my world blew up, and I didn't know anybody directly. I did know one from a class I'd taken, but no close friends. And that does change it, when you lose so much at something like that, to want to go there. So that's what I'd say about the money. And I know the gold. Oh, the other thing I do know is the gold. So I saw the pictures of it. um, there was a FEMA photographer that was brought around, and he came out and was a whistleblower, which was really incredible. And he actually was brought down into the basements and things like that as 9/11 was happening. I mean, that same day. And he released a lot of his photographs. And what he pointed out was the safes, like where the gold was kept. He goes, the doors were blown from the outside. So he is like, if this was from the collapse, it would have been different. But he's like, the doors were blown. And he said when he saw those originally, it didn't land. Like, he just thought it was damage from the towers coming down. And then when he looked at the pictures later and realized, oh my God, no, this was blown from the outside. So that was a big one for me too.
In regards, because you mentioned it, the drills, right? So my understanding is that at the day of 9/11, there was the exact drill scenario based also as a training that actually happened, right? That airplanes were hijacked, right? What I saw is that when Kennedy was involved in the Cuban crisis, and I don't know the name anymore, how they call it there, but his Joint Chief of Staffs presented to him the proposal to blow up American airliners mid-air and
Yeah.
to blame it on the Russians. What I want to say with this is,
Yeah, that was Operation.
yeah. So it's not, how shall I say this? Again, I don't want to go into too much speculation, but this is not speculation. This is declassified. This is based on declassified documents. We know this happened, and it came from the Joint Chief of Staffs of the USA, right? So the thought of using airplanes as a means to achieve something doesn't come from 9/11. Yeah, it comes, from way earlier than that. Yeah. What I also know from Kennedy tapes, and I'm slightly digressing here, because Nixon was not the only president who taped conversations in the White House. Kennedy did too, and we know from there that in the Cuban crisis, America seriously considered a first strike on both Russia and China, right? And having the Ukraine war here on the doorstep here in Europe where I'm sitting, I would be very surprised if, certain scenarios are not played through, at least in a kind of, test scenario. Anyway, I'm digressing here. All I wanted to say is airplanes used and filled with passengers, right, to have the real impact. That's not something new.
Well, I
Please.
want to speak to what you said is it's not just digressing. That's actually admissible evidence. It's so one in the fire investigation manual, you look at the history. So you've got to see who has the motive, to do something like this, and is there a history of that type of pattern happening before? So with it's Operation Northwoods you're talking about, where that document that was declassified, and that's very clear that they'd considered this before. So that is very admissible because it's like it's showing that this is not that a suspect, you could say, has used this same. It's just like the bombings in '93, and in this manual. So like I'll just read this one. I don't know if I have it on here. I don't. So what they have literally is terrorists. They have a clause on terrorists inside the fire investigation manual, and they say terrorists use fire as but one of their means of bringing buildings down, and they talk about explosives. So they're not naming one. It's not like, one person did this in the past. This is a class of people that do this type of thing, so we need to investigate it. Well, if you've got a Joint Chiefs of Staff saying we're willing to use planes to start a war, then we need to look at that. Is that what's happening here? And that's where I think we really, as the American people and as humanity collectively, we've got to step up, because our investigations are compromised now. There's no doubt. We can't deny it. So we need to be investigating these things on our own, and not allowing this type of thing to happen, because if we go along with it, it's implied consent. If we're not saying stop, it's implied consent. And that's what I couldn't really let in, was like, I actually fueled this war by not only believing it and ranting, beating my war drums, but by not questioning. And so I think it's really important to look at that stuff from the past and see what we have done. And it's also moving forward. If you know the pattern of a false flag operation, it's pretty clear. And those intelligence guys help me see it. And they're like, every time you can see boom, 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 this is what happens. And so that's the way a lot of them are prevented now too. So there's a lot of people on the inside that will start exposing things when they see those steps happening.
I'm looking at this from a behavior analysis perspective. I'm a behavior analyst. And there was a very interesting book written by Naomi Klein. It's called Shock Doctrine. She applies it on financial shocks, on economic shocks that force a country to adopt certain policies that the country otherwise wouldn't do. Yeah? But she describes in a very concise manner what a shock can do to people. And I think we don't have to have any discussion that 9/11 definitely was a shock to many people. And the memories, and when I say memories, I'm actually looking at how memory is formed in the brain on the neuron basis. The memories and thoughts on that day are engraved, and that's literally true. They're engraved in our brain. They have created separate neuron paths in our brain, which are far deeper imprinted than any thoughts that you and I have today, and the associated feelings that go with them. And then, and this is where when we talk about false flag operations or conspiracy theory, that makes it very difficult, because people very often cannot jump out of this thought pattern that was imprinted under a severe shock. So that's why I'm very mindful not to, how shall I say this? I don't blame people for wanting to believe something is a conspiracy theory because they can't cope otherwise. That doesn't take away that apparently, and we don't have to be too specific, but in human history, in warfare, there have been situations where conspiracies actually have taken place. I don't want to digress too far. Operation Gladio, right? The secret army in Europe. Conspiracy. No, today we know it's true. We have all the papers. Conspiracies do exist. Yeah. And of course, there are also crazy theories, like we never were on the moon or something. I don't know. Yeah. But it's very often for the common people a very fine line. Whom do you believe today? So what I like in our conversation here, I can clearly see you're emotionally engaged. And what makes you interesting is that you changed your point of view after you did your own research. That's the only way how to address topics like that. So you have a credibility here. Are there any items? I mean, I have seen you speaking, not enough, I have to say. I've seen a couple of your speeches and interviews that you have given. I feel there's room for improvement, so to speak. Yeah, I think you have a story to tell, and you also tell it in a way that is engaging. You also have the facts, but I do believe you have the same challenge like Richard has. People put you very quickly in this corner of conspiracy theorist. Is that something that you're experiencing?
Yeah, I don't do a lot of talking for 9/11 anymore. So how would I say it? I mean, you said it, conspiracy. I mean, it's there's so many conspiracy theories that have been proven true. One of my good friends who says, "I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm a conspiracy realist." So to not realize that that term has been turned used against us is crazy because I can dismiss anything you say by saying, "Oh, you're a conspiracy theorist." Well, that's silly, because if you look at so many of the fire investigations, police investigations, there's conspiracies everywhere every day. So they exist all over the place. So my experience has been usually when I talk about 9/11, I don't go into conspiracy theories like when I do it for Firefighters for 9/11 Truth. And there's a movie, I don't know if you've seen Calling Out Bravo 7. Have you seen that documentary that we have?
Yes, yes,
Yeah, and
definitely.
that one we don't go into conspiracies, and that's so when we've done that, it's how would I say it? When I first spoke about 9/11, the first time it really went public, it was interesting. It was at a press conference in San Francisco, and this was more than 10 years ago. That video started going viral and then it was taken down. So, and I don't know why it was taken down, but it was taken down. And my experience then was people were really listening. And so I'd say overall, when I've spoken about it, if I'm in my zone, you could say, and really delivering clear information, people instantly go, "Oh my God," they let it in. And then what I see happen is they close back down. So it's a day, 2 days, a week later, and then they get angry at me. And it's like, interesting. So I literally had one just uh, I'm not going to say the name. It's a public person who's actually now apologized over the Donald Trump stuff. And well, I'll say his Naomi Wolf, and she came to Seattle and for her own book thing, and we ended up talking to her, my lieutenant, myself, and we talked about 9/11, and she saw us as two firefighters in Seattle, that these guys are credible, and she opened and she was like really like whoa and letting it in. And then it was about a month later or 2 months later she wrote an article and just lambasted us without naming us, but just how we were crazy conspiracy theorists and all this stuff. So I saw her let it in, and then bam, that door shut, and it was like, I cannot let it in. And that's been my experience. So to this day, I don't talk about 9. I used to talk about it all the time, but the other work that I'm doing now is where my passion and my drive is, and it's not about conspiracy theories. So so I'd say it that way. I'd be interested to see your feedback, like how to be more effective, though, because there are ways, to talk about it without triggering people. I know that, and sometimes I'm good at that, sometimes I'm not.
Yes, I had a similar discussion with Richard. There is indeed a way, yeah. Most people make the mistake to provide facts, but I mean,
Yeah.
depending on which thought stream you follow, yeah. I like the one which says we have three different brains. We have the brain stem, that's the oldest part of the brain, instinctive level. Then we have the limbic system, that's emotions, and then we have the neocortex, which is ratio. And for your arguments, you have to address all three brain types, so to speak, and in that specific order. The brainstem you address in something new or unexpected. The limbic system via emotions, and politicians often use fear as an emotion to trigger something in the population, right? And only then you provide the facts. And you have to do this again and again and again for each argument that you're making. So that's the way how to reach people. It's not that easy because
Interesting.
it takes a lot of preparation, but especially for documentary or film, this is how it should happen. And again, in the video calling out for Bravo 7, facts, 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 right? So
Yeah, there's a lot
I
of
mean,
facts.
it's a
Yeah.
great video, and I will put a link in the description of our conversation here. Of course, I recommend everybody to have a look at it because it is facts, but true facts. You know, there is no opinion here, there is no hearsay. Those are facts. I would like to point out one thing. I saw Massimo Mazzucco. He's an Italian filmmaker, and he's in that video from calling out for Bravo 7. And he came up with this quiz of 22 questions, I believe, all of which can be taken by the listener, and you can make yourself, you can you can evaluate yourself or your self knowledge about what really happened 9/11. So again, I recommend everybody to do this little thing. Okay. Good. Erik, is there anything, again, I know we have not even scratched the surface, yeah, but is there for our conversation, for the purpose of our conversation today, is there anything you still would like to add? Anything that you deem important that we didn't scratch on?
Um, no, not really. I mean, I think we covered quite a bit. The I think I'm good.
Good, Erik. Then I thank you really.
Is there anything you have still?
Sorry?
I mean, we covered the fire investigation that day. I'm just trying to think if there's anything that I haven't that we don't have on the website too.
Yeah, you will provide me with some
Mhm.
additional documentation. Anything that I can put into the editing part of this video, I will include. Okay. But for today, for
Okay,
now,
great.
I thank
Thank you
you.
so much.
I thank you for your time. I wish you all the best, and we definitely will stay in touch.
Okay,
Okay.
great. Thank you so much for your time too and the work you're doing. All
Thank
right,
you.
take care, Thomas.
Likewise. And that's where I want to leave today's conversation. Not with a neat answer, because truth rarely arrives neatly packaged, but with an open thread. A thread I'll keep pulling on in my exposés on Substack. Because it's on Substack where I can slow down, bring sources, documents timelines, and really dissect the patterns behind the stories in the headlines. So, if you made it this far, you are clearly someone who doesn't accept fabricated narratives. Someone who prefers evidence over slogans, structure over spectacle. And those are exactly the people I'm building my Substack around, a space where we can go deeper without algorithmic throttling, without corporate filters, and without the constant pressure to delete complexity into 30-second sound bites. So if you want to have the full story behind discussions like today, the documents, the historical parallels, the uncomfortable questions that don't survive on mainstream platforms, join me there. It's free, it's independent, and it's where the real work happens. Stay sharp, stay open, and remember, always look beyond the headlines.